Welcome to Up to the Challenge, One Scientist Push to Improve Kids' Reading, featuring Ohio State teaching and learning researcher and professor Dr. Shayne Piasta. I'm Robin Chenoweth. A little bit of housekeeping. Feel free to post your questions in the chat. At any point during our discussion, we will be addressing those at the end. This session is being recorded so that you can reference it later. Dr. Piasta's lab website lists a lot of the research that you will hear about. We'll share the link to that and to other research in our chat. At the end of our session, you will be sent a short feedback survey. Please take the time to complete this so that we might bring you more information and more sessions in the future. By way of an introduction, I want to tell a quick story. I first met Dr. Piasta back in April 2016 when I interviewed her about a $3 million grant that she had just received. I was new on the job. I had been writing quite a few years, but this was my first article that focused specifically on a research grant, and it was certainly my first piece about interventions to teach children to read. Dr. Piasta had just received tenure, but had been researching how kids make sense of letters and words and their meaning since she was an undergrad at the College of Holy Cross in 2003. Since I had raised two children and volunteered helping first graders to read in their urban school, I thought I knew a little bit about the subject, but no. I quickly learned from Dr. Piasta that there is so much more to understanding how children decode and comprehend words and even speak them than I could have imagined. She told me then, there are no panaceas for teaching children to learn to read. Indeed, there are no quick fixes and no one-size-fits-all solutions. That was nearly 8 years ago, and she is still saying that. To date, Dr. Piasta has directed, co-directed, or collaborated on more than $47 million of research on early reading. There are more studies in the pipeline, but Dr. Piasta has conducted more than 24 so far. Many were the first to break down the particulars of children's alphabet learning and the reading interventions that might help those and other literacy skills to develop. One result of her work is that Head Start, the federal program, adopted Dr. Piasta's alphabet knowledge benchmarks that children should know 18 capital letters and 15 lowercase letters before kindergarten. Shayne Piasta has received, and please note how many of these awards include the word science, from Barack Obama, the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, from the International Society for the Scientific Study of Reading, the first Carol Connor Mid-Career Award, from the International Reading Association, the Dina Fedelson Research Award, from the National Academy of Sciences, the Kavli Frontiers of Science Fellowship Award. I could go on, but you get my point. I know that Dr. Piasta does not like superlatives and is uncomfortable with accolades, but I've heard this over and again from Ohio State faculty and nationally from people in the field. If you want to know what works and what doesn't when it comes to bringing kids into the world of the written word, you must look at the research and scholarship of Dr. Shayne Piasta. Welcome, Dr. Piasta.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
What made you decide to pursue a career in early literacy research?
Well, I have always loved books and loved reading. I now know that a piece of that is due to what's called having had a rich home literacy environment. So I grew up in a household where back in the day when you got 2 newspapers a day, my parents always read the newspaper in the morning and again in the evening. My mom actually had been an English major and started off as a high school English teacher. And she loved novels, she loved poetry. Our house was filled with books. And my dad wasn't much of a read for pleasure type of guy, but my dad loved doing things and fixing things and putting things together. So he was always reading manuals and instructions, and he would get, some science magazines and things like that. So I grew up in a home where I understood that reading was important, that it was something that you could enjoy. You could use it as escapism and as entertainment, but also something that was really important in order to learn things about your world and be able to do things in the world. And as I went through school with my peers and as I entered the College of the Holy Cross as a psychology major, while also taking education courses, I was really dismayed with this idea that not everybody has that same experience that I have. Um, and something else that I noticed was that my mom started as a high school teacher. She then went down to preschool, and I would hang out in her classroom with her all the time. Actually, nap time with the soft music and rubbing some backs and things was one of my like de-stressors during college. I would stop by in the afternoons.
It's
But I was
great.
also a super nerdy kid, and I wanted to go to all the things and learn all the things my mom was learning. So I'd go to all of her professional development with her.
Hmm.
And especially once I got to college and I was taking courses on how people and children learn writ large, and also taking courses in education, I noticed that what was being conveyed in some of my mom's professional development did not align with what I was learning in these courses. And I also saw my mom, particularly when she became a preschool director, she was just inundated with brochures and flyers and these other things from publishing companies. And it seemed like they were switching up what they were doing, whether it was curriculum or whether it was, some extra supports and materials for the classroom. But there was always something new that was better and was going to be better for kids' outcomes. And so they were always trying to like keep up with this and switching what they were doing. And it really made me wonder, well, how do we know if this is better? How can we make the best decision we can for the practices that we want to implement in classrooms? And then as an undergraduate, I was really fortunate to have a wonderful advisor, Dr. Annette Jenner, who was a reading researcher herself. And so through that experience, I learned about ways that we could generate evidence that then educational decision makers could use in order to make the best decisions they could for their settings and for their students. And so
Mm.
that's really what led me to also want to do that type of work. Um, I have so much respect for those teachers who can manage classrooms of 20 or more children. I knew that was never going to be my contribution. But my goal is to generate evidence that we can use to do the best we can to support children's early reading trajectories.
So early on, what needs did you see that weren't being addressed, and how has your research helped to focus on those needs?
So the big need I saw, like I said, was this idea that it didn't seem there was any rhyme or reason for why we were switching practices or why something new coming along might be better. So the real need there was the need to generate evidence that stakeholders, education stakeholders, could then use to inform their decision making. One example of this, you talked about the Head Start outcomes framework. So earlier in my career, I looked at the early learning development standards that were set across the nation for children's alphabet learning. And what I noticed was that these were really all over the place. There were lots of expectations that children would be learning about the alphabet during their early childhood years. But some standards would say they should know a few letters. Some standards would say they should know the letters in their name. Some standards would say they should know half of the letters or 10 of the letters. And what that made me realize is that these were not necessarily based on empirical research, right? These were our best estimates of what children should know and be able to do during that time period. So
Mm.
that's what led myself and my colleagues to do some work where we actually looked at how the number of letters that children ended preschool knowing, how that predicted whether or not they were at risk for literacy difficulties in first grade. And so what we found was that if children knew at least 18 uppercase and 15 lowercase, they were very unlikely to be considered to be at risk for reading difficulties later on in their school career.
Hmm.
So that's how we were able to set those in again, generating evidence that we can base our decisions on. Um, Another need within this that I am particularly concerned with is the need for causal research on effective literacy practices. So we use all kinds of data, right? We use informal data from our own experiences. We use descriptive data and correlational data, such as what I use to inform those alphabet learning standards. But oftentimes what we want to know is, okay, this publisher just sent me this glossy, pretty brochure and says that this is a better way of teaching something. Well, do we have any evidence that actually using that practice causes better outcomes? So that's one of the questions I'm always trying to get at with my work. And so we've gotten at that through some of the alphabet work. We've established that teaching names and sounds together tends to be a most effective strategy for teaching letters rather than teaching only names or only names and then moving to sounds. A student recently completed her dissertation and tested whether multisensory instruction would be more supportive of alphabet learning than non-multisensory instruction. So the idea of really incorporating not just sounds and names of the letters and seeing them visually, but also having some tactile elements and some gross motor movements and things like that. She actually did not find strong evidence that there was an advantage of the multisensory instructional approach. And then we've also looked at this in a number of other studies where we've looked at very specific practices. So these could be curricula that are out there, these could be early literacy interventions. And we've looked at these and done these large scale experimental studies in order to determine, yes, this actually does have some evidence that it will lead to outcomes that we're wanting to see, or no, it doesn't, because I would never want educators to be spending lots and lots of money on something that we don't have any evidence that it might be effective, right? We really need to be careful and good stewards of our resources.
I know that you've done several studies that have shown that there were no effects. That happens from time to time, right?
It does. And for me, as long as it's a very well-designed study and you can be confident that, it whatever you tried was not necessarily better than whatever you were doing before, whatever a typical practice would be, then I think knowing what might not be effective is just as important as knowing what is effective.
Mm. So what else are you working on? Or what else have
Yes.
you done?
Yeah. So let's see. So some other ways that I think the work in my lab has impacted the field, we've engaged in developing certain tools for teachers. So for example, we developed brief letter sound assessments that are freely available on the web and can be used for progress monitoring and are equated over time and things like that. I've collaborated with others. We've developed other assessments that are meant to be teacher friendly and teacher used. So there's one, for example, about children's narrative language development that again was expressly designed for teachers. You don't need to have a degree in speech and hearing sciences necessarily in order to use it, which is also available on the web. And we've created lesson plans, we've created curricula. And again, most of these we try to just make freely available, given that we've often used federal grants to create these. It seems like they should be free resources for everyone to use.
Mm.
Some of the other ways that our work impacts the field, I think, is through our real commitment to dissemination. So the lab is careful to make sure that we are not only publishing scholarly articles about our work, but we're also publishing pieces that are a bit more reader friendly and might, be in the hands of reading professionals, such as through the Reading Teacher or the Reading League Journal. And we're also able to share that work and hope that it actually has real world applications through some of the policy briefs we've been able to put out through the Crane Center, as well as I've been a member of the state literacy team to inform Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. I'm currently on Ohio's P20 Literacy Collaborative, and these are ways that we can talk with others across the state and really help ensure that the information is out there. It's not just stuck in an ivory tower here on campus. And I guess the last thing I'd say about that is we also use the work that I and our other faculty do to inform our pre-service teaching program. So I serve as a faculty supervisor for our language and word study for all learners course. This is part of our core literacy coursework that all of our primary pre-service teachers and others complete. And we make sure that these courses are informed by the research that we and others are doing so that we can best prepare our teachers for their roles in the classroom.
It's a very important part of what we do at Ohio State, isn't it? This is a very charged topic. There are so many opinions about how to best teach children to read, but some of your research actually debunks some of the myths. What are some of the misconceptions that people might have, especially about the science of reading?
So the one that I take the most personally is it's lots of folks think, every child learns the alphabet. Every child kind of masters those initial letter names and letter sounds. And so we don't need to really worry about that or pay much attention to it. I would argue that is the foundational skill of being able to read in an alphabetic orthography like English. And that there's emerging evidence showing that the trajectory over which that happens and the timing of that may actually matter. So there are certain theories of reading which show that children need time to consolidate their learning about different aspects of literacy. And so children who do enter kindergarten having already mastered their basic alphabet knowledge may be on better trajectories for the continued literacy success than others. The other thing that I think is important about this is that, yes, alphabet knowledge is super important. Yes, most kids will learn it eventually, but there's so much else that we attend to in early childhood and we need to be attending to that we should really be focused on doing that as effectively and as efficiently as possible so we can really open up time for teachers to be focusing on other important aspects, other domains like math and science, other important key skills such as oral language and building content knowledge. So that's the pervasive myth. Alphabet learning is easy and we don't need to worry about it. In terms of the broader science of reading, there are lots of misconceptions out there. I think that, and I'll preface this with saying that there isn't a definition that I think everybody across the field of reading, whether you're a researcher or a practitioner, would agree upon. But I think there is one that comes close. And so the definition that I abide by is that the science of reading is the accumulated interdisciplinary knowledge we have from scientific research concerning the reading process and its components, reading development, and also best practices for reading instruction and assessment. And why I think it's important to start off with a definition is because what's really key there is that the science of reading is a knowledge base. So most of the misperceptions I see are that the science of reading is a particular program or it's a particular method. It's a particular curriculum or intervention. It's really not. It's aligning practice with a knowledge base that we have. Science of reading is also not simply phonics instruction. So phonics is really helping children understand the mapping that we have between the letters in our language and different spelling patterns and the sounds so that they can decode words. That is absolutely critical. It is absolutely necessary. We have decades of research supporting that, but it's insufficient on its own.
Mm.
So we think about most frameworks and models of reading. Some of the predominant ones speak to both the need for children to be able to read words or decode words, but always pair that with their ability to understand, because the goal of reading is reading for meaning. The goal is comprehension. The goal is
Mhm.
to communicate. And so children need to also have strong oral language abilities, strong vocabularies, world knowledge and conceptual knowledge in order to go from just simply decoding what are the words on the page to what is the meaning that is embedded here.
Mhm.
So those are some of the big misconceptions that I see. One of the others is that the science of reading only pertains to particular groups of students. And again, it's an accumulated knowledge base. So it pertains to all types of learners. It pertains to not just young children or elementary age children, but all the way through adult literacy learners. It pertains not just to English, but also to other written languages. It includes research that's been conducted with learners who exhibit linguistic diversity, so multilingual learners and English language learners and learners who speak various dialects. We have knowledge within the science of reading about how to best support these learners. And it also includes learners who do have special needs, like reading difficulties or dyslexia as well. So really, the science of reading, I think, if we could stick with a definition and really rely on that, that could help us with a lot of these misconceptions that are out there.
I know you're actually working on a really interesting study right now about research with non-speaking readers with Dr. Matthew Brock. What's that about?
Yeah, so this is really Dr. Brock's project. I was brought in as a literacy expert. But in this project, so there is an assumption that appears to be made that if children are nonverbal, that means they can't learn how to read. And so they're often not even offered an opportunity to learn how to read. And that's what Dr. Brock and the rest of the team want to address, because that is not the case. And so in this project, we are looking at two different reading instructional programs that are out there to help nonverbal students learn to read. And we're going to be looking at the effects of those and also whether maybe one program might be more effective than another. So I'm really excited to see what the results of that study will be.
That's fascinating. What else are you working on right now?
Oh, we're working on lots. So actively in the lab right now, we have a few different federally funded projects. So we have the Let's Know 2 project, which is an extension of some work we did as the Language and Reading Research Consortium. Sorry, so many acronyms in my line of
There
work.
are so many, yes.
Um, and in that larger project, the team developed a language-focused literacy curriculum. So again, trying to make sure that we're attending to all these important aspects that are needed for skilled reading and reading comprehension. And that original project was a curriculum for grades pre-K through 3. And in this project, what we did was we intensified that Let's Know 2 intervention, that language-focused literacy intervention, and are trialing this as a tier 2 support, a more intensive intervention specifically for children who are at risk for comprehension difficulties due to having low language skills. So we're actually partnering with a number of schools in the Columbus area and running this project out there right now. Another project I have is also focused on that important and critical language piece. Our Propel project uses secondary data. So we collected tons and tons of videos of early childhood classrooms and kind of what was happening each day in these classrooms. And we are using those to kind of take a bottom-up approach to see, okay, what are teachers doing in these classrooms that really is helping to support language development? And what can we learn from this in order to think about, future strategies that we can disseminate, that we can do further research on in order to best support language development very early on.
Mm.
And then in another project that we have actually wrapped up all the data collection, but we keep doing more and more analyses and learning more and more things. That was the Nemours Bright Start project, which we also ran in Franklin County area preschool centers and schools, where we looked at the effects of an emergent literacy intervention, specifically for preschool children who were at risk for later reading difficulties due to a number of different factors. So we're continuing to analyze those data as well. We
Are you
always, oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was just gonna ask if you are you working on any of the professional development programs that are now being used in Ohio?
Yeah, so we've done past work on Ohio's professional development for early childhood educators in the area of literacy. I don't have an active project right now, but we did submit a grant with colleagues where we would be evaluating the impact of a very popular current literacy professional learning experience that many teachers across the nation are experiencing, and the extent to which that impacts their knowledge, their practice, and then children's outcomes.
Mm, that's great. That's just a lot of research. You've got a lot going on, Dr. Piasta. What keeps you motivated to continue in this field?
Well, two things really. So first, as I said earlier, I am not cut out to be that classroom teacher, right? So I joke that I've always wanted to contribute and impact education, and this is kind of my backdoor in. So I really hope that the work that we're doing and what motivates me to continue is hoping that we are truly making a difference for teachers and students who are involved in early literacy. I do a lot of work in intervention and curricula, and that's very, very important to know if those things are effective. But when it comes down to it, it's the teachers in the classroom who are truly teaching children to read. And so if my research can help us do that better, then that's fantastic. Um,
Speaking of those teachers, post-pandemic, they're working so hard, I know, to bring up children's reading levels, and we have many new teachers entering the field of early literacy. What's some advice that you have for them specifically?
so I think it's important for teachers as professionals to be able to be critical consumers of educational products and research. So one way to do this, right, because we can't all be jacks of all trades. We all have specialized areas and responsibilities, but there are trusted knowledge brokers who are out there who help interpret research and make that more practical for use by teachers and other education professionals. So these would be groups like, um, let's see, the Reading League. Reading Rockets is a great resource. It's a website. There are entities like the What Works Clearinghouse and the National Center for Intensive Instruction that review studies and review curricula, materials, and assessments and put forth what is the evidence behind these. You have other groups like the Florida Center for Reading Research in Colorado. the University of Florida Literacy Institute, all of these different resources that I think are just really excellent at being able to communicate, okay, what does this research actually mean for day-to-day practice?
Mm.
So I would encourage teachers to really look for those trusted knowledge brokers and feel empowered to be critical consumers of materials and research, and also to build a professional knowledge and a professional toolkit so that they can really leverage what we know from research, but also integrate that with their own professional knowledge of particularly the kids in their classroom. How can we leverage their strengths and use that in order to address areas of instructional need? Again, getting back to that idea that there is no panacea that is going to work for every child in helping them learn to read.
Mm. Well, I know we're coming up on our question and answer time. But I do have one more question I want to get in here is, what advice do you have for people who want to research early literacy?
Come join my lab. Seriously though, I do think that engaging in research, having research experiences and having someone who mentors you through that is extremely important. So for anyone who is looking to get into research, who is applying for graduate school, that kind of advisor fit is something to really pay attention to. Make sure that you find an advisor who is interested in answering the same kinds of questions you want to answer. Make sure that they have research opportunities that you can be a part of. In my lab, we do a lot of learning by doing, right? And that's really important, especially when you're doing field-based work out in schools with teachers and with kids. So really, really paying attention to that fit and the opportunities you'll have through your mentor and your advisor to jumpstart your own trajectory as an early literacy researcher.
Mm. Well, I've got a question here from one of our participants. Does your research support teaching letter names in isolation or with sounds? I thought the sounds were more important to phonological awareness than the names of the letters.
So letter sounds are important for phonological awareness. There where we're just talking about the sounds themselves. But in our culture, we tend to refer to letters also by name. And so when we look at teaching letter names and then sounds versus teaching names and sounds simultaneously, the evidence that from the work I've done, as well as that others have done, including Teresa Roberts, really points to teaching both the names and the sounds at the same time.
Mm. Okay. What ages is this study 3 to 5 that is I'm having a little hard time reading this. What ages is this study 3 to 5 that is Ohio approved program development? Or is it starting with infant and toddlers too?
I don't know that I quite understand the
I don't either.
question. So what I
Maybe.
can say about that is that Ohio does have early learning and development standards, which pertain to children prior to kindergarten entry.
Mhm.
And so there is some guidance that's put together around that in order to best support, again, given what I do, language and literacy development there. And then, of course, we do have the Ohio Learning Standards for English Language Arts, which would continue to provide guidance about expectations once children enter kindergarten.
Okay. Does your research support previous research that rhyming is a strong predictor of student reading success?
So, I have not done a study to specifically look at that, but in writing a grant where we are hoping to study best practices in phonological and phonemic awareness instruction, I have recently reviewed all of the literature on this. Rhyming itself does not seem to be a very strong predictor of later literacy success and difficulties. Other measures of phonological and phonemic awareness actually seem to do a better job at predicting that. And of course, when it comes to instruction, what we ultimately want to do is be able to teach children to manipulate individual speech sounds, individual phonemes. So my take would be that the goal of instruction is to move beyond rhyming. That might be an entry point for getting children interested in playing with language, but to move beyond that to do some of the other types of manipulations that are important for phonological awareness.
Okay. Next question. How do we include those multilingual learners in literacy instruction? For example, a way of differentiating your instruction. What aspects of those learners should be considered?
That's a really big question. Um, and there are lots of folks who actually specialize in that in particular. I will say that the Reading League and other organizations highly involved in supporting the literacy development of multilingual learners recently put out a joint statement that's available on the Reading League website, where they talk specifically about this. And they also have culled a nice set of resources to help folks make sure that we really are differentiating, whether that's based on language status or on other components. One thing that I would say is that, being able to speak multiple languages is really a strength. And there's cognitive flexibility that comes along with that, that is a huge facilitator of learning to read and write. So thinking about where all your students are, including those who are language learners, and really meeting them where they're at to help them continue to build those skills, differentiating that instruction, leveraging those strengths is really what we want to be doing.
Mhm. I remember you talking about that, the first discussion that we had about how these kids tend to be okay later on. Like if you can just get them going on the reading, that they tend to do really well because they have multiple language skills. I think this is along the same lines. Do you also work on research on early literacy for English language learners?
So in our projects, we are often trying to do research that represents what a typical classroom in the area looks like, which would include learners who might have special needs, would include learners who are multilingual learners or learning English. My research includes those students, but I'm not particularly focused on those students. There are many, many scholars who their research program is about learning what is most effective and what is most helpful for those specific populations of students.
Mm. What do school partnerships look like in your research?
It can really range. So I think school partnerships are extremely important for the type of work that I want to do and the type of work that we need to be doing to move the needle here. So in some projects, we are asking schools to partner with us to actually try out, have their own teachers, try curriculum or try a particular strategy to support language and literacy. And so we're working on both supporting the teachers in doing that, as well as running the research project and partnering on that. In some studies, we are going out and we're partnering with schools and saying we can provide extra support. I have phenomenal research assistants who are great interventionists, and they will go out and they will come at a regular time each day and provide, that's what we're doing in the Let's Know Too project, provide supplemental instruction to kids who really need it. In other studies, sometimes schools, we might part with them even after the initial study has ended, because what's important is that the things that we're doing early on actually are meaningful for kids' continued literacy trajectories. So we might be following kids who are in one of our projects during preschool, and they might matriculate to certain elementary schools. And we approach those elementary schools to say, hey, would you partner with us so that we can continue in order to see what the long-term effects of this might be? So there's really a range of the ways that we partner with schools. And in all cases, of course, we offer anything we can to support the school. I'm always happy to do professional development. I'm happy to be parts of book clubs or professional communities of learning. And we always make sure to share findings from our studies with schools, although I always say that with a caveat of the research process takes a really long time. So it's not always very timely that we're able to share that back. But we are very committed to making sure, like I said, that what we find gets out there and is applicable to practice. And we're very open if there are other types of partnerships that schools want to engage in.
Let's do one last question. Does your research provide strategies for children who may have missed the window of strong early literacy or may come into it during kindergarten?
So I would say my research program is really focused on really like pre-K through maybe grade 1 or 2. Um, so we currently don't have any projects beyond the Let's Know 2 project where we're focusing on kids who are in those kind of early elementary grades. But we certainly do work on that. And there are certainly strategies. I mean, kindergarten is certainly not too late, right? We are still working on supporting kindergartners and identifying ways of supporting alphabet knowledge and phonological awareness and all these other key skills related to early literacy development.
I think I lied. I think I have one more. We have time for maybe one more. But yeah, let's just go ahead and ask this one. Will you open job opportunities for researchers with a PhD in literacy education?
So my lab contains or houses a team that has multiple different levels of expertise in education. So my lab does have postdoctoral students as members. We have PhD students and master's students. We have undergraduate students. I also do often have research staff who are hired. Currently have an amazing project coordinator who is a staff member in the lab. So it really just depends on what projects we have running and what funding I have to be able to support folks in the lab. And also very open. I've written training grants as well with those who wanted a postdoc experience, for example. So being able to support them in finding funding for themselves in order to join the lab and continue their academic journey.
Okay. Let's see if we have time to, we've got 1 minute. I'll just remind everybody to make sure you take that survey when we close out so that we can provide more of these kinds of experiences in the future. In addition to names and sounds of letters, would it be helpful to add keywords? For example, capital letter A, small letter A, apple.
So it depends. So one thing we do know that is effective about early alphabet instruction is that embedded mnemonics. So having a graphic that is in the shape of the actual letter does seem to help children learn to associate the basic sound with it. So for example, if you had a lowercase a in the shape of an apple, or the easy one I use usually is having the letter S, but it being a snake in the shape of the letter S. So there is good evidence that that is beneficial for kids. In terms of non-embedded mnemonics or keywords, really, there's not a ton of research out there on that. And that's something that is always surprising to me. We think we know, you'd think we'd know everything there is to know about supporting alphabet knowledge, but there are still so many unanswered questions out there, including, like I said, the keywords as well as other types of mnemonics. There just isn't a lot of research on it.
Mhm. Still a lot more
Oh
to
yeah,
research.
I feel like my research agenda will never be finished, which is a good thing.
That's good. That's good. Well, It's time for us to go, but I want to thank everyone for their fantastic questions, and thank you, Dr. Piasta, for all your insights and all your incredible work that you have done in this field to help children and teachers. Thank you.
It was really fun to chat about it.
Mhm.